Let us know the Bible, Old Testament, with Father Claudio Doglio. Traditional wisdom. In the Old Testament Bible collection, we find a series of books that are commonly called sapiential because they are texts containing wise teachings. They are the product of the school of the wise people of Jerusalem, a school that lasted many centuries since the time of David and Solomon until the exile, and again after the exile until the eve of the New Testament. Among the books that are called sapiential, we can distinguish two groups. On the one hand, we can place those that represent the traditional wisdom, that is, those that transmit Israel's common and constant teachings. On the other hand, we have non-conformist books that presents a challenge. These are two critical texts, Job and Kohelet. Now we will analyze the traditional ones, namely the book of Proverbs, the book of Sirach, and the book of Wisdom. Let us begin with the book of Proverbs, for it is the oldest writing that genuinely contains the wisdom tradition of the Old Testament. We also use the word proverb to indicate a saying of popular wisdom. Here, on the other hand, we are faced with a wisdom school, the results of reasoning that we could define as philosophical. The book of Proverbs is a true collection of short sentences, enigmas, curious, provocative, and interesting elements, synthesis of philosophy, of popular wisdom. There is no objective criterion for compilation, but many different uneven formulas are found together. These proverbs have had an independent origin. Each has its own history. Some of them are very old and some are very recent. They are different literary genres with different presentations, even with a different mentality, but all have this one characteristic: to pass on to the younger generation the experience of the teachers of the past. The proverb has the function of communicating what has been learned from the experience and to pass it to others. While the Old Testament prophets communicate what the Lord has revealed to them, the wise ones rather communicate what they have learned by their experience, by their reflection, by their ability to observe the world and the events of people. In Hebrew, the term we have translated with as proverbs sounds mashal and comes from the similar verb mashal that has two meanings. The first meaning is to be the same, similar, and the second is to dominate and control. What is the relationship between these two meanings? The observation is interesting because it helps us to understand better the meaning of a proverb. First of all, it is important to observe what unites the two realities, what is similar between them, just to be able to make a comparison, looking at the similar elements that are repeated in world events enables the wise to master reality, to control what happens, understand how things go, how the world goes. Therefore, this collection of mashal is an instrument that teachers also offer to students. The first recipient of this collection is the young. They receive this information. They are the students who are preparing to enter the public administration of the city of Jerusalem, and among the other studies they must face, there is also a humanistic discipline that we could define as the art of knowing how to live. In fact, for ancient Israel, the wise person is the one who knows how to do, not the one who knows many things, the one who has an education and erudition. He is wise, the one who knows how to make, the craftsman, and know how to make with his hands. But notice the passage. Immediately afterward, we came to say that the wise man is the one who knows how to do it. The French speak of savoir-faire, and we understand well what it means. It is to know how to do it. The wise man is the one who knows how to do in life, the one who knows how to live. This is the art par excellence, the sublime science that deserves to be learned, the art of living well. The biblical scholars want to teach young students this difficult art, that is the art of living well, and so they observe reality, the events, the character of the people, and they try to synthesize them in some formulas that can help to recognize situations in such a way that you can choose well, where there are many possibilities to choose the good and always the bad. This school worked for centuries in Jerusalem, starting with Solomon until the tragic moment of the fall of Jerusalem in the exile. While the teachers produced the text, they were recollected or collected, and over the years the collections grew and were transmitted from generation to generation. The collection of proverbs increased over the centuries. After the exile, when a small remnant returned from Babylon and resumed life in Jerusalem, there was no longer the court school, there was no longer the court, there was no longer the autonomy, there was no longer the function of training the new generation for the work of court officials. And yet, the teachers preserved and resumed those ancient traditions that taught how to live well. Around the 5th century, an author who we can define as a literary genius made the last edition of the current book of Proverbs. He gathered many ancient collections from the time of Solomon, from the time of Hezekiah, from other times and other authors, even with collections of foreign authors. There is a talk, for example, of Lemuel, who was king of the region of Edom. There are texts very similar to a collection of Egyptian proverbs. This means that the ancient masters also knew the wisdom of other peoples. They translated their proverbs to Hebrew and adapted them for their students. The author collected all this enormous material who did the last editing. This author also added an extensive introduction. The first 9 chapters of the book of Proverbs constitute this introduction, which refers to all sapiential literature, and it is presented as a speech that a father gives to his son or a teacher to a disciple. It is an exhortation from the adult to the young person, inviting him to follow the good path, make good choices, and observe the teacher's tradition. Now, as this author has before him above all the young, and all the young men are in the age immediately before the marriage, the students are 15, 20 years old, he used an image that should interest to such an audience and spoke to them about the search for the ideal woman. Young people understand that immediately. They are looking for a woman, they are looking for a wife. I recommend you to look for her well, because if you find the right woman, you are lucky. The author plays with a double meaning. He is talking about the search for the ideal wife. Young people listen to him very interested, and little by little, they realize that the teacher is talking about a special woman. He's talking about Lady Wisdom. This author has employed an exciting intellectual process. He has personified wisdom. He spoke of her as if she were a woman in flesh and blood, as if she were a teacher of life that intervenes in concrete life. She speaks in the street, in the marketplace, in the main square of the city, in front of the city gate where people gather, where the market is, where the court is. where there is also an entertainment environment. In concrete life, this author presents the personification of the wisdom that speaks to people and invites them to her school. In chapter 8 of the book of Proverbs, we find one of the most important texts of this personification of wisdom, where this figure tells her own story. She invites men by saying that she has excellent assets, says that she is the one who guarantees the government and the kingdom of the world. And then goes on to say, the Lord begot me by the beginning of his works, the forerunner of his deeds of long ago. God generates wisdom as arhe, in Hebrew, reshit. It is the beginning of creation. We recognize a language that the evangelist John and also the Apostle Paul use, and they applied in the New Testament to Jesus. He is the wisdom of God generated from the beginning. He is the beginning of God's creation. Our author is making an anticipation without knowing it, anticipating what the Trinity mystery will be by anticipating a particular detail, unfolding the figure of God and inserting the wisdom as a person who is next to God, is the daughter of God, and accompanies the Creator during creation. From of all that was formed at first, before the earth, the Lord begot me. I was always formed when he made firm the skies above, when he fixed fast the springs of the deep, when he set for the sea its limit, I was there with him as artisan. Proverbs 8:22-30. The translation says, I was there as artisan. I prefer to translate differently. I was there as a child, and I was his delight day by day, playing before him all the while, playing over the whole of this earth, having my delight with human beings. She's a splendid image of the wisdom that is now an adult woman with authority, but once in the beginning she was a child. And while the world was being created, she was small and playing, dancing on the table of the world. She was her father's joy. It is a splendid image of a philosophical poet who wants to teach how there is a revelation of God that helps to live well. And then the application will be of this type to young students. Marry wisdom, beware of foolishness, he says. Beware of the foreign woman, the wife of others, the adulterous and prostitute woman. It is not only a moralistic discourse, it is a symbolic one. These characteristics of the foreign woman, the woman who belongs to another, the prostitute woman, is an image of the culture, the mentality, the way of thinking. The foreign woman is an image of the mentality of other people. This Israelite master teaches his young disciples to love their own tradition, not to go in search of the latest news, the latest fashions, and tastes coming from outside, from other cultures, from other mentalities. He wants again the mentality that was spreading in the Greek world or the Hellenistic philosophy, to invite young people to welcome, to follow, to love, to marry the biblical tradition with the wisdom that comes from God. In this line also, part of the work of a particular author that we know as Ben Sirach takes place. Also called Sirachide, it should be Siracide, because it is a Greek name and means descendant of Sirach. This character, whose name is Joshua, son of Sirach, should be said Siracide. But now we have the habit of calling him Siracide, and we have to keep it that way. He was a teacher in Jerusalem who collected his educational books around the year 180 before Christ and published another book of Proverbs with one difference. He writes all this by himself. These are his educational products, his reflections. The last great book of traditional wisdom of the Old Testament is entitled Wisdom. However, the book of wisdom was born in Egypt, in Alexandria, in the 1st century before Christ. It is probably the last book of the Old Testament written on the eve of the Incarnation, but it is written by a Jew and is addressed to Jews living in the great metropolis of Alexandria in Egypt. They are a small group, a minority amid a large Greek-speaking population which has a Greek mentality, therefore also idolatrous. They are the Greeks who have inherited the culture and tradition of ancient Egypt, and the colony of Hebrews that lives there is experiencing again the history of the ancient Egyptians who were in Egypt. And since many of these Jews had a bit of a complex of inferiority compared to the Greek culture, they considered dominant because the teachers of the University of Alexandria despised everything that was not Greek, and in fact called them barbarians. So the author puts himself in Solomon's place and gives a speech to two audiences. Probably the author is a university professor, an educated person who writes in excellent Greek and addresses his colleagues. It is addressed to people who have a role and authority in that Hellenistic city. And to them, he says, the Hebrew tradition is not at all inferior to yours. At the same time, to his fellow Jews, he says, do not feel inferior because the revelation that we have received from God gives us a culture, a way of seeing life that can easily be on par of Greek wisdom. And he faces a very important question: the justice of God. It seems that there is no justice in this world because the righteous suffer and die young. Some righteous people cannot have children. How is it possible that God can do things well in this reality? Our author opens a new way. He speaks of a solution for life after death. God's justice comes after death. There is a retribution in life after death. This is a novelty that the ancient master did not know. The souls of the righteous are in the hands of God. It is a text that we all know. It is often used at funerals. Chapter 3 of the Book of Wisdom. In the eyes of the fool, it seems we are dying, but in reality they are at peace and receive a great reward from God. The author asks the Lord, "Give me the wisdom that sits beside you on the throne, and do not exclude me from the number of your children." This embodiment of wisdom continues. Wisdom is now seen as the one who sits beside God on another throne, and it is precisely this wisdom that sits on the throne beside God that becomes man in the person of Jesus Christ. And we are already in the New Testament. It is the full revelation of God's wisdom.